I say we jump right into things. Let's talk a little bit about iPhone 14 post launch, specifically how it's selling. So far, it looks like demand for the new models seems to be on the good side. So, the new Pro models, that is. So the Pro models doing pretty well, as you might expect, but sounding a little bit like Apple's strategy for the non Pro versions of the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus might be giving consumers a little bit of a pause, depending upon what you think. I'm going to tell you what the analyst is saying, and that's our favorite analyst, Ming-Chi Kuo, and then we'll talk about my thoughts and opinions on what might be happening. So Ming-Chi Kuo did his little checks as he does when the iPhone launches, and he says that demand for the Pro models has been kind of neutral to good. It's looking okay, not a banner year for the iPhone. And, there's not a lot of huge new advancements. There's some really nice stuff. I mean, we do have Dynamic Island, which is incredibly cool, and developers are doing some interesting things with that already. So that could be really, really fun. But, new camera, there's a nice new camera in there, some nice enhancements. But unless you're like a pro person, right? It's kind of like back when we had the S years a little bit, right? There's not a major redesign. There's not a whole ton of stuff going on. There's some nice little enhancements like we talked about. So he says, hey, those are doing okay. Those are doing pretty good. But consumers seem to be holding off on scooping up the iPhone 14 and more specifically that iPhone 14 Plus. And so the question becomes, was going the plus size the right thing to do, or should they have stuck with the mini? Is that what's going on? He thinks there's a chance that Apple could even lower future order numbers for the iPhone 14, iPhone 14 Plus. So they could kind of pull back on those because they're just not selling through that well. He does claim that pre-orders for the iPhone 14 Plus are, quote, significantly lower than expected. I think he even said lower than the iPhone 13 mini last year. And if you remember, last year we talked about Apple immediately cutting back on the iPhone 13 mini. It just wasn't selling that well. So I'm not really sure what that's saying. Now, to be fair, on the iPhone 14 Plus, I'm not sure he's factoring in the fact that that model isn't even shipping and or it's going to ship much later in October. So there's probably not that sense of urgency among consumers. He's looking at the fact that you can order an iPhone 14 Plus and you still get it on time and stuff like that. So they don't seem to be very back ordered on that. But I don't think there's this kind of mad rush to get them like you would see with the pros. Early adopters tend to be pro users, and your average consumer, I think, is going to be more likely to wait. So consumers who are going to be more in for the iPhone 14, iPhone 14 Plus, they're going to wait for their upgrade cycle to come due, their sell plan to come due, and then they're going to upgrade. So I think those models will sell more slowly, but I think ultimately they're probably going to be very good selling models for Apple, probably right up there with the iPhone 14 Max. Pro Max is going to be, it's always the big seller. The Pro Max is the big one, but I think they're going to be right up there, and I think they're going to sell very, very well for Apple. I think more and more consumers are looking for larger phones than smaller phones. I know there's a lot of you out there who prefer the smaller form factor, and we're a little bit disappointed to see the mini go away, but it just seems to be the general trend for most phones. So I think that's going to be okay in the long run. I think it's really a little bit too early to tell, and Apple always does kind of pull back on production right after the launch, and that's a typical scenario that we see. And I don't think you can read too much into it, but that's what Ming-Chi Kuo was kind of alluding to or saying this week.